Welcome to the Lean Solutions Podcast. This is the podcast that adds value to leaders by helping you improve performance using process improvement solutions with bottom line results. My name is Patrick Adams, and this season I'll be joined by three other amazing hosts, including Catherine McDonald from Ireland, Andy Olrich from Australia, and Shane Doffenbaugh from the United States. Join us as we bring you guests and experiences of lean practitioners from all over the world. Hello and welcome to this episode of the Lean Solutions Podcast, led by your host, Andy Olrich, and myself, Patrick Adams. How's it going, Andy?
Great, Patrick. How are you?
I'm doing good. I hear you're on vacation south of your normal location in Australia.
I am. Having a nice time, but certainly wouldn't miss this for the world. So thanks very much. Great to be here.
Good deal. Well, let me talk a little bit about the topic for today. We're going to be talking about celebrating failures. Celebrating failures in lean is crucial, and it's an important aspect of fostering a culture of continuous improvement. By acknowledging failures, teams can identify root causes, experiment with alternative solutions, iterate towards more effective methods. I mean, there's just so many benefits by taking time to reflect on some of our failures. The approach encourages a mindset shift from a fear of failure to embracing experimentation and innovation. Celebrating failures in lean promotes transparency, collaboration, and a shared commitment to organizational learning, ultimately leading to more resilient and adaptive teams capable of achieving sustainable success. Andy, you mind introducing our guest for today?
Sure, Patrick. Yeah, very lucky today. We've got Mark Graban, the author of The Mistakes That Make Us book, fantastic book that's out now. And Mark is a renowned speaker and consultant. His other notable works include the award-winning Lean Hospitals and Measures of Success books. Mark serves as a consultant through his company Constancy, Inc., and also a senior advisor for KaiNexus. Mark is also the host of podcasts like Lean Blog Interview and My Favorite Mistake. Welcome to the show, Mark. Great to have you here.
Andy, great to be here. Welcome to the podcast in your hosting role here.
Thank you very much. Thanks very much.
Yes. Mark, this is not your first time on the show. We're excited to have you back to the show. Welcome back and to this new season. Obviously, this is our first time with two hosts, so we'll see how this goes. And as you mentioned, Andy's first interview, so excited to be part of this.
Okay, Mark. So the book's been out a little while now. So let's jump right in, I guess. Tell us about a mistake that you've made recently or even today.
Sure. I've got one fresh on my mind from about an hour and a half ago. Thankfully, it's nowhere close to the realm of anybody being hurt or losing a customer. So, all mistakes or all failures aren't created equal. This was more embarrassing and a little maybe frustrating to a couple of people. But, there's a webinar series that I host and moderate through KaiNexus. Ironically, the topic today was mistake proofing with a presenter, John Grout, who is a professor and an expert in mistakes and mistake proofing and the Toyota production system. A mistake I've made before is in the chat of the webinar. The default says you can chat with host and panelists only. I did not change that default to chat with everybody. So I'm doing things like trying to share a link to the slides. And I even said verbally, I'm going to put a link in the chat. You can click to download the slides. And then, 20 minutes later, I noticed I was about to reply to something else. And I had replied to someone else's chat. Like, I'm not chatting to everybody. Right? So it was a mistake. And I'm not blaming the people who didn't call out, hey, where's the link to the slides? Like, that would have helped if someone had, if you will, pulled the andon cord and said, Mark, you said you were sharing the link. Where's the link?
Right.
And, but the thing that's embarrassing, and it's a different level of mistake. I think of a quote that I used to lead one of the chapters in the book, Akio Toyoda, who had been CEO and is now chairman of Toyota. And he said, basically, I'm paraphrasing, but it's in Toyota's DNA that mistakes made once are not repeated. And I would try to live by that ideal. I would try to set that bar and that standard for myself. So I had made that mistake previously, along with all the different mistakes I've made running webinars and hosting them, I have a checklist that has been populated with the countermeasures and the attempts. If I go down the checklist methodically, I wouldn't repeat that mistake. And I think I'm stating fact and not blaming anybody involved. As we're going through our final prep for the webinar, there had been a hiccup, technical hiccup on the presenter's side. That threw me off a little bit, but that's the moment when the discipline of the checklist should have saved me. And I lost sight of that, like quite literally lost sight of it, didn't do it, and made a mistake. So there's an opportunity and a reminder around a checklist is only as good as your discipline in using it. And checklists are by far not the most effective form of mistake proofing. So I'm trying to show myself a little grace. I've got a coffee mug here with some mantras on it, and I'm going to remind myself of, okay, be kind to yourself. Nobody's perfect. We all make mistakes. The important thing is continuing to learn from our mistakes. And that one stings a little more, because part of the lesson is to continue learning how to learn from my mistakes and not repeat them. So I'm trying to reflect without bordering into beating myself up land.
Yeah, I think it's a great call out. I think everybody listening to this would have had a moment where they have got into a webinar or started presenting and talking away to slides or something, and then someone, not trying to be too polite, but just, a lot of people will sit quiet, so someone will speak up and say, "Oh, I can't actually see what you're doing there." So, and the fact that someone like you can still make those mistakes, Mark, I think that gives us confidence that we're all okay.
Well, I mean, it's called being human. So when you say someone like me, I'm like, you mean so I'm absent-minded, I'm mistake prone, someone like me? I mean,
yep.
But that's where, like, when we talk about terminology, like, I don't like calling something a stupid mistake, because it's not a matter of being stupid. Smart people make mistakes. We can protect ourselves from mistakes through mistake proofing and checklists. But yeah, Andy, you talk about I forgot to share my screen mistake. A couple of weeks ago, I was doing a LinkedIn Live, and a couple of minutes in, I finally went to go look for the comments, and the comments were like, "Can't hear you.
Oh,
no audio." So I laughed at myself and killed the LinkedIn Live and went back and tried it again. But I rarely do a solo LinkedIn Live, right? So if I do it with someone else, they would have caught the audio not working mistake before we went live. So again, learning opportunity. And back to what you were saying at the beginning of Patrick. I don't know if I would celebrate that failure. I think I like the word acknowledging better. It's not good that the failure was there, but if I can't acknowledge it, I can't move forward in a way that hopefully leads to learning and improvement,
Yeah, that's a great point. I think for some organizations, that have a fear-based culture and they're trying to shift away from that, it might be something that to celebrate like failures loudly and but you're absolutely right. I mean, it's still it's still something that is positive. But to your point, Mark, if you take the time to reflect and learn and make adjustments accordingly so that it doesn't happen again, hopefully, that's definitely an achievement worth celebrating, right?
Sure.
Just thinking as you were talking, Mark, you mentioned the checklist, and when we're mistake proofing, right, we want to try to put some kind of I like to say, you make system solutions, not people solutions.
Right.
And there's different types of mistake proofing, detection, but so checklist is one of those that isn't going to absolutely secure you from never making mistakes again. What are some other examples, maybe of, poka-yoke or different mistake proofing methods that are more system-based versus people-based?
Well, I'll keep it in the realm of webinars or podcasting. with Zoom in particular. I've made this mistake, was pre-Zoom. I think it was back in the days of Skype, in the late 2000s or early 2010s. The one and only time I forgot to hit record on the interview. You think about how that would make you feel if you had to come back to someone and say, I'm sorry, we did that whole interview and I didn't record it. So with Zoom, I could have a checklist with the step of like, don't forget to record. I could put a Post-it note on my keyboard that says, don't forget to record. Zoom has a helpful feature where you can set it to record automatically at the start of a meeting or at the start of a webinar. So to your point, Patrick, I would call that a more systemic, a system poke-yoke. It automatically happens. Now, that does create the risk of a different mistake or failure where inevitably there'll be some of that pre-go live chat that's happening behind the scenes. Now, in my role of publishing the recording, I would want to not forget to record out that upfront talk. You know, so maybe that the risk of that mistake is not as bad as the risk of not recording. You know, our presenter today, John Grout, talked about, you know, sometimes you want to, even if you haven't made a perfect system, if you can create the opportunity for a benign failure, that's not as bad as a catastrophic failure. Like he used one example of like a poke-yoke on an assembly line and something's upside down, so the line is designed to jam. Like that's a solvable, fixable, non-destructive failure, as opposed to something upside down coming through the line, if it wasn't caught, might crash a machine or create a defect that would affect the customer.
Yeah. Yeah. And that just made me think about, risk analysis and taking, for those of us that have utilized PFEMA or a FEMIA, understanding the power of that and the importance of that when we're utilizing that, especially for new processes or putting new equipment in or whatever it might be. I mean, taking time to actually really assess the potential risks that could happen and then being preventative instead of reactive to put things in place ahead of time, to protect you from that. Things that could be even, severely could cause death or, harm to people, which would be, even greater issues. So,
yeah,
I think
definitely agree.
Yeah. Go ahead,
understanding and being comfortable with that risk. What jumps to mind is two things: is some pieces of equipment, for example, might have a shear pin or something that is designed to fail, designed to break, so that larger catastrophic thing can't occur, and people are comfortable knowing that, that's there and that exists. But we prefer that to, if we didn't have that particular failure point in there built in. And the other thing, Mark, just a bit of fun. When I said people like you, I really meant someone very experienced and does this quite often.
Yeah.
Have you got any room on the other side of your coffee mug for the checklist? You're talking about your affirmations there. Reading that. So
the checklist is either a spreadsheet or sometimes I print it out.
But I may be jumping to solutions.
No, the checklist is too long to fit on the coffee mug. By the way, this coffee mug has a broken handle because of a shipping mistake made by the vendor. I had these custom mugs made with my affirmations on the back. Trying to remind myself, be kind to yourself. It also applies to be kind to others, including the company that shipped me, I think, like 10 coffee mugs, and 4 of them were broken.
Oh, geez.
They hadn't been packaged correctly and they all broke, on the handle. Well, so then in the name of good customer service, they apologized. We're so sorry. We'll send you 4 replacement mugs. 2 of those were broken.
Oh, no.
At least we're getting close.
Yeah. Improving some. Oh dear.
But I started using a different vendor that can print with the same quality, but has more reliably packaged them. So even though they tried to make up for it, I eventually took my business somewhere else.
Right. Well, that's a good example of, allowing the same mistake to go through multiple times and the ripple effects of that downstream for, our customers or whoever that may be. I mean, it's obviously an important aspect of continuous improvement. And I just was thinking as we were talking about the machine or the risk of putting a solution in place that could cause other issues or harm or whatever it may be. That's physical harm. We were talking before we hit record about psychological safety. Andy, you had mentioned an article that Mark wrote. I haven't had a chance to read it yet, but any thoughts on the article and how that could tie in with what we're talking about today?
Yeah, so the article I was referring to was on Mark's blog, and it was around how, if you don't have good psychological safety in place, it can be deadly. And it was referring to an example in the airline industry. But Mark, it'd be great if you could talk a little bit about that, please.
Yeah, I mean, it was something that I had written him reacting to in response to a really long investigative piece in the Wall Street Journal. This is, after the January 5th incident where, in layman's terms, part of the side of the plane blew out at 16,000 feet early into the flight. Nobody was killed, thankfully. But there's this door plug, and people think, at least what's being said publicly, is that there were some bolts that had not been properly tightened that led to it coming loose and being jostled and some turbulence perhaps, and it flew out. And the pilots were able to land safely. Speaking of checklists, though, the cockpit door supposedly popped open. And I watched one video. I've tried to take some really deep dives into industry people talking about all of this, that there's supposed to be a panel that pops open by design to even the pressure between the cockpit and the back of the plane. Well, door's not supposed to pop open. That's now a security risk. But some safety checklists and emergency checklists were supposedly also sucked out of the cockpit and out to the side of the plane. So they were having to work off memory, and I would call what they did heroic. But on the manufacturing side, the Wall Street Journal had this piece. The headline was, "This has been going on for years inside Boeing's manufacturing mess." And there's lots of stories about, and I've read this in other places, quality inspectors getting in trouble for doing their job. Like, hey, we're pointing out problems. And I've worked, started my career at General Motors when it was not a lean culture. And the pressure was for quantity and production speed over quality. It was not a stop the line to do it right the first time culture. There are things said about Boeing that kind of remind me of that GM culture, even though Boeing would say they've been implementing lean for decades. But back to one other thought on the psychological safety thing. Psychological safety means that we feel safe to speak up, pointing out problems, admitting mistakes. I've got an idea, disagreeing with the boss. Like, psychological safety doesn't mean I'm free, free from being disagreed with. Like, hey, don't disagree with me, Patrick, because my psychological safety. Like, that's not how it works. Because of your psychological safety, Patrick, you should feel safe to speak up to me. So there's this question of, do people feel safe speaking up about defects? And let me just read this one story. As I wrote about, I literally knew what the punchline was because I've seen this and been through it. So it says a Spirit Aerosystems employee, and this is who makes the fuselage and initially installs that door plug. They threw a pizza party for employees to celebrate a drop in the number of defects reported. So that word, I hear you going, Patrick, that word, defects reported, that's not the same thing as the actual defects, right? That's why you're going,
Oh, yeah. I picked it right away as soon as you read it.
So here's the punchline of the story. Chatter at the party turned to how everyone knew that the defect numbers were down only because people were reporting fewer problems.
Yeah.
Worse.
Good scorer beats a good player, hey?
Yeah, I mean, so I think a lot of the focus is either on, I've seen somebody who wrote literally, and this made me throw up a little bit, somebody who's trying to be tongue in cheek. They said, I don't want to die because some idiot didn't tighten a bolt. I'm like, that's not cool. Like, the problem is not some idiot. It's far more complicated than that. Probably comes back to culture. And some would say, well, that person just needs to do their job. And I'm like, are they given the right tools? What's the inspection process? Are they under too much pressure? I mean, there's so many other factors than just do your job.
Yep. Yep.
End of rant.
Yeah, so much to unpack here. It made me think about a story that Mr. Yoshino, when we were over in Japan with Katie Anderson on the Japan trip over there, he talked about, and this is in Katie's book as well, but a story when on the paint line, and I'll probably not be able to give all the details exactly, but basically what happened was, he allowed a mistake based on the work that he was doing on the line, and he created a problem, and he stopped it, pulled the andon cord, pulled the line, said stop, there's an issue, and thinking to himself, I'm about to lose my job, because I just stopped an automotive assembly line.
Well, he feared that.
Yeah, he was scared. He didn't know what. He was a young engineer, I think he was at this time fairly new to Toyota.
Right.
And so he wasn't sure what was going to happen. And they came to him and thanked him and celebrated that he pulled the line and apologized to him that they allowed him to be able to make this mistake, because that's in their mind, that's disrespectful, that systems were not set up for him to be successful. Right. I mean, that's what we have to think about. We should never see on a root cause analysis form or a solution that we're retraining operators, that it's the operator's fault. It's just, that's not the case. What are the system? Where was the breakdown in the system? Right. That's what we have to ask ourselves.
Yeah. Right. And that story was so vivid. Katie was so great to line up Mr. Yoshino to come on the My Favorite Mistake podcast with me, with her. He told that story. A version of that story is in my book, The Mistakes That Make Us. It's bookended. That story was 1960s Japan. It's bookended by a story told by my friend David Meyer, who started at the Kentucky Georgetown plant. We'll call it the late 80s. Instead of a paint shop, it was a bumper part molding line. But if so, it was the wrong chemical added to a machine. And the reaction was very similar. We didn't set the system up. We didn't set the workers up for success. I love the expression, I always cite Daryl Wilburn, but I'm sure he heard it from a lot of other Toyota leaders, that it's the leader's responsibility to design a system in which people can be successful. That doesn't mean perfect system, right? There's always room for Kaizen, but how are you supposed to guard against? So I put the wrong chemical in the machine, but that wrong chemical wasn't even supposed to be there, right? It was a supply chain and materials issue, probably more at root. And I think it's unfair to ask people to be on guard for a mistake that has never happened to you or isn't part of the standardized work. And, you could mistake-proof the design of the barrels so that they're more visually dissimilar. Same opportunity in healthcare with medications and mix-ups that occur in a pharmacy or in a nursing unit. So yeah, big opportunities for mistake proofing. All sorts, but I want to maybe say one other thing. Sorry, I don't want to be giving a TED talk here, but different types of mistakes or failures.
Hello, everyone. I am sorry to interrupt this episode of the Lean Solutions podcast, but I wanted to take a moment to invite you to pick up a copy of my Shingo award-winning book, Avoiding the Continuous Appearance Trap. In the book, I contrast the cultures of two companies I worked for. And though each started with similar lean models, one was mechanistic and only gave the appearance of lean, while the other developed a true culture of continuous improvement. The contrast provides a vivid example of the difference between fake lean and true lean. You can find the book on Amazon. Simply search my name or the title of the book. You aren't a reader? No worries. The audiobook is also available on Audible. Now, back to the show.
So what Mr. Yoshino is talking about is a process failure. And I think that's a different kind of failure or mistake than what you were talking about earlier in terms of innovation or improvement, where when you're innovating or improving, doing something new for the first time, I think you have to expect to fail. And then to what you were saying, celebrate it. And a lot of my podcast guests have talked about that culture in their company. It's hard to mistake-proof a bad decision, but we can mistake-proof a fairly regular, repetitive process, whether that's painting a car or running a webinar. And I think that's the difference between mistakes that we really try hard to prevent versus the ones we want to discover and learn from and celebrate. But either way, psychological safety is required for people to speak up about either type of mistake.
Yeah, and I think again why it really resonated with me, Mark, is I spent some time working in underground coal mining. Okay, and obviously personnel safety was number one. And we actually had a poem shared with us they told us it was written by a coal miner in the US somewhere. And it was called "I Could Have Saved a Life That Day, but I Chose to Look the Other Way." And that was the whole story about how he didn't want to speak up, and he'd done that similar thing before, and so on and so on. Anyway, in this case, his mate didn't come out of the mine at the end of the day in good shape. So that was, again, and you see it a lot more now. But yeah, there's such a obviously importance around quality and workplace satisfaction, but it's real. It can turn quite bad quickly if we don't have those things and people are comfortable to speak up. So I really appreciated that article.
Thank you.
Mark, what would you say? We've talked a lot about culture here, but I mean, what factors do you think organizational culture and leadership play, in this whole topic of creating a culture where people feel safe to make mistakes or, take the time to reflect and learn and adjust, as they go forward. I mean, what role does leadership play in all of this?
A major role. I mean, it arguably starts with whoever's at the top of the organization, owner, plant manager, CEO, what have you. I'm really fortunate to have taken some formal training and certification through a company called Leader Factor. The book, one of the key books about psychological safety, and I'm having a complete brain cramp on the 4 stages of psychological safety. Oh my goodness. Here's another mistake.
Okay.
That's a total mid-afternoon brain cramp. Timothy Clark, my goodness. I've interviewed him and talked and written about him so much. Timothy Clark. So I think his research is really insightful and helpful in that there's really 2 key countermeasures, right? Here's a short list. Leaders need to model the behaviors that they want to see and then reward people when they take a chance at following their lead, right? So I'll use KaiNexus as an example, and we've done formal surveys that kind of confirmed, I think, our sense of it, that it's a pretty high psychological safety culture, and employees will say so, and compared to other places that they've worked, it's an environment that doesn't punish people for speaking up. It better than just tolerating it, right? You have to reward it and celebrate it. So I think part of that culture, I share stories about this in the book. Co-founder and CEO Greg Jacobson. Greg is very willing to admit when he was wrong, when he made a mistake, not to shame himself, right? We're not ridiculing him. What's wrong with you? But I think that openness sets a really good tone and sets a very practical example. And I think setting that example is more effective than just encouraging people. I want you to speak up. Actions matter more than words. So when the leader speaks up and then someone else on the team admits a mistake and he reacts positively to that, now you start getting a positive reinforcement happening there. And there are times in the weekly team meetings, someone will share a mistake in the spirit of, well, hey, I want you to learn from me, and let's talk about ways of preventing that mistake. And no one's ever getting teased or formally punished. Like I think it starts with leadership and gets reinforced at different levels down to the frontline staff.
That's right. Andy, if you don't have a question, I have another question.
Sure, go.
All right, I got one for you, Mark. Just as you were talking, I was thinking about a specific leader in an organization that maybe is a little bit the opposite of what you were talking about. And I remember him leading completely with fear-based, like, I want to instill as much fear into my team as possible, and in hopes that they'll never make mistakes. And I just remember, man, when he came out on the production floor, everybody would completely change the way that they were working because they wanted to look good and not get yelled at or not have them stop and talk to them. And I'm sure others that are listening right now are probably resonating with this, or either have worked at companies or know leaders that that lead in that way. For those that are listening that maybe work at an organization where they have a leader that leads like that, I mean, any recommendation, any suggestions to them on, how do you continue to make improvements to try to make an impact in the area that you have control over when you work in an environment that is almost the opposite of what we're talking about today?
So somebody like that has been put in a really tough position.
Mm-hmm.
As much as I admire people for speaking up in risky or dangerous workplaces that way, and I mean like psychologically unsafe, like that doesn't scale well. Like no matter how bad the environment, there's always somebody who's still willing to speak up. Sure. It might be someone who's planning on retiring in 2 months. So like, yeah, what do I have to lose? Mm-hmm. That changes their dynamic of thinking through, should I speak up or not? And I would never, I try to address this in the book. I would never want to lecture people and say, like, you should speak up, or to frame it sometimes as like, well, you should be courageous, or, people with high character speak up about, and like, well, I don't think that ability to speak up is a matter of courage or character. It's a function of culture. Mm. And so I like, look, sometimes people need to just protect their paycheck, protect their family, protect their house, their roof over their head. And I don't say this flippantly. I think there's times when people should keep out of trouble. If the culture and your leaders are not welcoming the disagreement or the speaking up, then you know what? Stop speaking up. Now, that creates a situation like the poem, which I want to go and read, right? Of I could have saved a life today, but I looked the other way. Somebody still might feel really guilty for being involved in a situation that maybe wasn't completely their fault. They get in trouble for speaking up, they stop speaking up, and then somebody dies. Like who wants to live with that on their conscience? So, I mean, I say this not trying to sound flippant, but sometimes you need to quit and find another job. And I know that's not always practical. Someone might be locked in on a pension that's coming. And again, it's like, yeah, just you hate to see people in a situation where it's just a matter of trying to get by and survive and keep out of trouble.
Right. Yeah, I think you also have to, like, to your point, I mean, you have to protect your own mental health, and and at the same time balance that with being able to pay your bills, so that's a really difficult situation. And it made me think about it, because a couple individuals that worked at that company, I really my heart went out to them, because I knew the difficulty of making a change to an executive leader like that. Obviously, we had some conversations, and I was completely candid and real with that person about what I was seeing and experiencing and hearing. And yeah, I guess I was just curious, because, I know that happens, and there are individuals out there that are working in organizations like that. It's a tough place to be in, for sure. Andy, I don't know, do you have any thoughts on that, or?
Yeah, it is a tough one. And I really do feel for those people who may be right in that situation now and listening. And yeah, it's one of those things. There's a phrase that we use, or a description we use here. I don't know whether you've heard of it, but it's called the ducks on the pond look. And what that talks about is, if you're walking around with a leader, or you observe a leader walking into a work area, and all of the people immediately start to move away. Like you said, they start to change how they're working. They all seem to go over to a far corner, like the ducks on the pond. They all start to scatter, but just very quietly. And it's like, oh, okay, what's happening there? Or so, yeah, there comes a point where, if you can pull yourself up a level from that, I'm getting in trouble. It's more like, hey, someone could die here, or I know that person is struggling mentally over there, and someone's got to speak up. And we have, but I know a lot of people are quite proud, and they don't want to come across as, like, again, what we call down here a whinger. Someone who's always speaking up. It's always the one person who's seen as a complainer and a whiner, and then we just pretty much ignore everything they say at times too, because they're constantly speaking up. So it's a real challenge for people. But you've got to feel safe, and that's where the leaders, like you said, it starts at the top. And if they're if they don't get feedback regularly, they see that as a problem. And some places I've worked in have measures. If the employee suggestion scheme is tapering off, hang on, or hazard identification is tapering off.
Yep.
Yeah,
For sure.
I mean, I've seen organizations that have celebrated, I'm going to bring up the word reported again, in healthcare. The number of reported incidents was increasing. And why is that a thing to celebrate? Because they were closing the gap between actual incidents and reported, right? Now that gives you a fighting chance to see the impact and the harm rates start going down, right? So, and for a lean audience, hopefully this resonates with people. You need more than psychological safety, right? That eliminates the fear factor of why do people not speak up? It's often because of fear. If people do speak up and they get thanked and nothing else happens, people stop speaking up for another F word, futility. And I'll cite Ethan Burris. I didn't have a brain cramp on him. Ethan Burris, University of Texas, Austin, in his research, without good problem solving, the futility factor kicks in. So I think a lot of people in lean land have done so much training and emphasis on problem solving. I think the bottleneck is often psychological safety or the lack thereof. So speak up, psychological safety, then use problem solving to put the issue to bed so you're not having to be kind the next time the same mistake is made again.
Yeah. Love that. And I think in the lean space too, with the visual management supporting the structure around that, like people have a structured way of capturing that, and it flows down into a problem solving or a visible 5 whys underneath each of those. Like that's where I find that the visual management of lean is really powerful, because it's not how I would describe a problem as opposed to someone else. We can find a standardized way to capture and measure and see it all in one place. I think that's really where, when I've worked in lean organizations, it's like, and it's all there. There's nowhere to hide. If that one's not closed off, we see that. And hang on, this is important to someone.
Yeah.
This is their voice.
Yeah. But let me share one other thing real quick that I think, lean audience might appreciate. Maybe trying to think through if speaking up is a function of culture. So you might have people who have been bullied into not speaking up at work, but when they go into a meeting with the teacher or they go do something at their church, they're speaking up all the time. They're making suggestions and it's being rewarded in those settings, so they're going to keep doing more of it. Then they come to work and it's very situational. They're not a different person, but they've learned to adapt to maybe a nasty workplace. And the thought experiment, which I'm curious if it's ever happened in the real world, you take someone who had worked, let's say 20 years at Toyota Georgetown, and they had to move to Michigan because of family. And they're like, I don't know how this be. They go get a job at one of the Detroit automakers that also had physical and-on cords. But maybe it was still back in the era when people would get yelled at for stopping the line. I bet that Toyota person would learn very quickly to develop new habits. Same person, different culture. They're going to act differently.
So true. Yeah, that's such a great point. And yeah, I'm sure that happens all the time. And such an important reason as leaders for us to look at our culture first and understand that we need to make adjustments to the culture and put a lot of effort into, changing that piece of things before we try to throw, tools out there. So great, Mark. Mark, the book's been out for a number of months now. How's it going? How are sales? How's the traction of the book? Are you hearing feedback on it? What's been happening?
Yeah, so I mean, as of this recording, book's been out a little bit over 6 months now. The reviews have been pretty positive. It's hard to find a book that ever has full 5-star reviews. Then you only hope that the reviews that aren't 5-star have something constructive or useful in there. But I think the response has been good. I'm doing more webinars and speaking engagements related to the book, and I think there's this opportunity to help with one or both of these two pieces: psychological safety or problem solving. I think they go hand in hand. I think there's bigger opportunity, to try to help bring people up to speed around not just the psychological safety concepts, but what we can do, to help cultivate that in our workplaces. So yeah, I mean, it's hard to answer that question of like, well, what do you think about the sales? I'm always trying to figure out how to get the word out, and
right.
I think the book's good enough to publish and not perfect. And, there's things I look back and like, oh, I could have said that more clearly or what have you. But, thinking evolves. I try to keep learning. I keep talking to new people, who inspire me. Figure out how to get better at learning from mistakes and help others do the same.
Well, I've seen the book in many people's hands, and I've heard all good things. So it's definitely one that everybody that's listening in should get a copy of. We'll drop a link in the show notes. So if anyone's interested to grab a copy of Mark's book, there'll be a link in the show notes. And then, as always, we'll put a link to your website and your LinkedIn. And so if anyone has a question, they want to reach out to Mark, feel free to grab the contact info out of the show notes and reach out. So, Mark, it's been great to have you on.
Thank you.
And once again, love checking in on you and just kind of seeing how things are going with your book and speaking and just love the work that you're doing and helping to positively impact the lean community. So thank you for that. Appreciate you being on the show.
Thank you, Patrick, and welcome aboard, Andy. Thanks for diving into this.
Thank you very much, and yeah, really important topic, and yeah, good on you. It's great to chat. Thanks.
Thank you both.
Thanks so much for tuning in to this episode of the Lean Solutions Podcast. If you haven't done so already, please be sure to subscribe. This way you'll get updates as new episodes become available. If you feel so inclined, please give us a review. Thank you so much.